Welcome to episode 42 of Tales from the Bridge. 42, interesting number for a science fiction podcast. We have Kevin J. Anderson on the show today, and we go deep down the Dune rabbit hole. We really hope you enjoy this conversation. It goes a lot of interesting places. 2 weeks from now, we're back to our regular episode where we review The Last Watch by J.S. Dews. And then 2 weeks after that, a conversation with Charlie Strauss, a really cool one. Hope you enjoy that. All right, let's make our way over to the bridge.
Today on the show, we are super honored to have Kevin J. Anderson with us. He's a wildly prolific writer who has written over 120 books with 23 million copies of his books in print. He's written 13 or maybe 14 now prequel novels to the Dune universe, along with Brian Herbert, Frank Herbert's son, and over a dozen classic Star Wars novels. He's contributed to the Star Trek, Alien, Planet of the Apes, Earth AE, X-Files franchises. He's written his own magnum opus called The Saga of Seven Sons, and I think there's also a duology that he's written as well, independently, and as well as many Dark Horse comics. So the list goes on and on. And today we want especially to talk to him about a recently released last volume of a trilogy that he wrote with Neil Peart, the drummer of the legendary Canadian band Rush. So that's very close to our hearts, of course, being Canadian. So welcome, Kevin.
Well, great to see you guys. And boy, if you're Canadians, I gotta jump on here. If you're Canadians, you should know it's pronounced Neil Peart, not Pert. So there you go. We
learn something every time.
I challenge your Canadian credentials there. So you're not.
How did we not know that? That's wow.
Well,
Wow.
that is totally up your alley. I blame you, Tristan. You're the music guy.
You just lost half of your audience there, man. They just
oh man, that's like 3 or 4 people out of the global audience.
out of the 6 who listen to the podcast. So it's wow.
So, well, you know what? While we're there, let's just let's keep going with this topic, because I need to know, Kevin, were you a prog rocker? Was this something that you grew up into? Did you listen to Rush when you were younger, or what kind of stuff were you listening to?
Oh gosh, yeah. When I was just in high school, I signed up for. I lived in this little town out in Wisconsin, and there was no record store, and there was no bookstore, and in fact, when I was a little kid, we didn't have a library. We had a little bookmobile that came around. But I'd signed up for something that like only us old guys remember, something called the Columbia Record Club. And you kind of signed up for it, and you got 12 albums for $1, and then you had to buy like 3 albums over the course of the year. And I
you probably still owe them money, right? Like they're still coming after you for those.
It's really hard to unjoin the club. But when I was a kid, it's like, I want all these records, and you just, it's like a sheet of stamps that you pick, and each stamp is like an album cover. And albums are what came before CDs, and CDs are what came before MP3s, and it's what old people used to listen to. Anyway, that they had all these pictures of albums, and I was this science fiction nerd, and I wanted to get some music, and there was Alan Parsons' I, Robot, and Styx, The Grand Illusion, and Kansas, Point of No Return, with this ship sailing off the edge of the earth, and sea monsters, and then a whole bunch of albums by this group called Rush. And it was like 2112. And I went, well, that looks science fiction-y. And then there's a Farewell to Kings with this ruined castle and a puppet in front of it. And I just went, I had 12 albums to pick from. And I just went, okay, fine. And I picked a whole bunch of Rush albums. And when you're just a teenager, you want your own music, not your parents' music, right? And my parents listened to like easy listening country western stuff. And I really, really just wanted to express myself with music that would truly annoy my parents. And boy, did Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson and Neil Peart's drums, boy, did that annoy my parents. So I played it really loud. And I just got into all these science fiction, prog rock, all this music that inspired my imagination. I wanted to be a writer since I was a little kid. So even in high school, I'm writing really bad short stories about warlocks and time gateways and everything. So I'm listening to the Rush albums, and not just Rush. I mean, there's Alan Parsons and Styx and Kansas and And the lead album by Boston has like this flying guitar spaceship going to an alien planet, and it was like the glory days of prog rock. And I grew up with that, and my very first novel, Resurrection Inc., was inspired by the Rush album Grace Under Pressure. I mean, like the Rush album is all, it's kind of like dystopian science fiction and dark and gritty Big Brother kind of songs. And I used that I used it in this novel I was writing, which is also a kind of a dystopian far future science fiction murder mystery thing. And just because I was a fanboy, I kind of snuck in all these Rush Rush lyrics into the novel that I knew about, that I didn't figure out anybody else would get. But I put and I sold it to Signet Books, which was Stephen King's publisher. So that was a pretty big deal. Brand new science fiction book. And I put in the front of it that this novel was inspired by the haunting album by Rush called Grace Under Pressure. And I thanked Neil Peart and the other two guys in the band for the inspiration. And when it got published, I mailed off like signed copies. I just like, to Rush, care of Mercury Records, and I mailed it off to the Mercury Records address, which, I mean, we all know it's never going to get there, right? It's going to go into the mailroom, and then it's going to go into like the warehouse with the Ark of the Covenant or something like that. But like 2 years later, I came home from a day at work, and there was a letter in my mailbox with a Canadian stamp and the return address of Neil Peart. And there was he had gotten the book. And he read it, and he really liked it. So he wrote me this like 3 or 4 page single-spaced letter about how much he liked this book. And at the end, he just said, and if you want to keep corresponding, I'd be happy to do that. And so we were friends for like 32 years before he passed away a couple years ago. And we wrote a short story together called Drum Beats in I think the late 90s, kind of a creepy rock drummer bicycling through Africa discovers this weird African village with haunted drums. And we published that, and we worked really well together, but we always kept trying to find like some project, that like bigger project to do. But I mean, I was writing Star Wars books and X-Files books, and Neil was off touring and doing things. And we just kind of never really got the right project at the right time. But then fast forward to like 2011, I think. And Neil is trying to put together what would turn out to be Rush's very last studio album called Clockwork Angels. And he had in his head like the steampunk scenes and airships and pirates and a steampunk carnival. And he got turned on to steampunk because he read some of my books. I mean, I've done Captain Nemo and a bunch of other novels that were steampunk. And he liked the aesthetic, and he kind of liked the ideas behind it. And so he's writing me all these questions asking about steampunk this and alchemy and airships and how does the transportation work. And so we're just kind of brainstorming. And remember, we had been friends for decades, but I'm still like this Rush fanboy inside. So I'm just going, Neil's asking my advice about these songs. And so they wrote, it's a big concept album. It's got a whole story running straight through it, kind of like Pink Floyd The Wall or Tommy by The Who and some other concept novel albums. And he's sending me the lyrics as he's writing the songs, and he's putting the story together, and I'm loving it. And then my wife and I had lunch with him in a diner in Santa Monica when they had recorded a couple of the tracks, and they're working on it, and he's working on the last songs. And he was just so enthusiastic about this project, and he's like gushing about the music and the lyrics, and he says that this isn't just going to be a concept album, it's going to be a Broadway musical, and it's going to be a novel, and it's going to be Ice Capades. And I remember being Rush fanboy. I'm like going, ooh, cool, a Rush Ice Capades. And my wife is like listening more closely, and she says, but Neil, a novel? Who's going to write the novel? And Neil goes, well, Kevin is, of course. And so that's how he solicited me to write the novel of Clockwork Angels, which is it's the story in this album. And so, I mean, I'm obviously on board for that. And during a Rush concert tour, they came to Denver, where the area where I live, and it's a beautiful amphitheater called the Red Rocks Amphitheater. It's kind of this natural amphitheater with big rock pillars all around it and things. And Rush played 2 concert dates there, a Tuesday and a Thursday, I think. And so he had Wednesday off. And since he had Wednesday off, I took him on a hike. But it wasn't really a hike. I took him to climb a 14,000-foot mountain in the Rocky Mountains.
Oh, wow.
And we both together went up this, it's called Mount Evans, all the way up to the 14,000-foot summit. And on the way, we're brainstorming, and we worked out the characters and the background world. And I kept asking him questions about how the story worked and how the world worked. So we kind of, he had the whole story, but he didn't have a lot of the, but what about it? But what about it? But what about it? That kind of stuff fleshed out. So we finished the brainstorming, and then when I wrote the book after we'd outlined it, we went back and forth, and then I would write like a chapter in the morning, late morning, and send it to him, and Neil would read it and get comments back to me by that afternoon. He was like right on top of it and really working along. And this book, when it finished, it just was like one of those perfect books. Everything worked in it, and I loved the way all the pieces were. Neil loved it, and when it was published by ECW Press, Neil's Canadian publisher, it's a gorgeous book. It's got full color paintings by Hugh Syme, the cover artist for Rush, and it's just this beautiful book. And when it came out, it immediately hit the New York Times bestseller list, and so I was able to text Neil like right as he was going up to perform at a concert in I think New Hampshire, and I was able to say that not only are you an adequate drummer, but you're also a New York Times bestselling author. And that book came out and it won some awards, and I just was so proud of it. But we loved that world, and we kept kind of talking about other stories of the other characters, and it took us, I think Clockwork Angels came out in 2012, and it took us almost 3 or 4 years to figure out how to do this. So it wasn't just we didn't just want to do a collection of stories. We wanted it fit together like this, like Canterbury Tales. And we figured out how to do that. And we just did all these stories, all these side stories of other characters in Clockwork Angels, but they also were tied together by another story that is even cooler, and it fit together. And while I said that Clockwork Angels was one of my favorite books of all time, I think that Clockwork Lives is my best book that I've done, and all of them. That everything worked. I loved it. But when we were doing one of the stories in there, it's called The Percussor's Tale, about a guy, he's a music instructor, he's a musician, but he's getting a degenerative disease, so he can no longer keep his hands straight, he can no longer keep perfect rhythm. So he builds this clockwork drummer that keeps perfect rhythm, and it's powered by quintessence, the source of life, and he's got everything perfect. This steampunk, really cool percussor. And at the end of that story, he turns the percussor loose to do the greatest concert ever, and he's playing drums and all kinds of these exotic alchemical musical instruments, and he's evoking all these images from the world and the universe. And we had one line in there, and Neil wrote all this with the drummer performing, because I don't know drumming. Neil's the drummer, so he writes all this about and the music's creating the swirl of northern lights in the great white north, in the frozen land of Ultima Thule, and beyond the ends of the earth. And our character is Owen Hardy in Clockwork Angels. It's one of our greatest characters. It's sort of this young, optimistic guy who wants to see the world. But at the end of Clockwork Angels, he's old, and he's retired, and he's tending his garden and remembering all the adventures he had. And so when we finished this part in The Percussor's Tale about the Great White North and the Northern Lights and Ultima Thule, and Neil just said, wouldn't it be great if we just did a story where we explored up there at Ultima Thule in the Great White North? And I said, we could bring old Owen Hardy back out for one last adventure, that he has to go up to the Northern Lights for something. And there's a thing in the book about he's got one one of his grandsons is like him, who's idealistic and bright-eyed and wants to see the world. So I said, why don't we have Owen take his grandson up on this adventure? And then we also came up with, well, I mean, if you're a Rush fan, you will get this. If you're up in the Great White North in the frozen lands, of course you have to meet this other famous Rush song, Bytor and the Snow Dog. And we just took the Bytor and the Snow Dog and ran that into it. And we started talking about doing the third book that kind of wrapped everything together with the main character from Clockwork Lives and the main character from Clockwork Angels. We just brought them together, but we just kind of, I mean, I was really busy, and Neil was getting ready for the R40, their 40th anniversary, kind of their grand farewell tour. And we kept talking about, well, we could do this for Clockwork Destiny and that. And I was keeping notes, and I had all the Dune books I was doing. I had my own series. I had comics I was writing. I was teaching. So it was like, and Neil Rush was going to retire after their R40 tour. And so Neil was going to have a lot more time to relax after that. And there was just never any hurry. We had all the time in the world. We were going to just do this. And then very shortly after Rush retired and Neil was finished with all touring, then he got diagnosed with glioblastoma, a terminal brain cancer. And he had very little time left. And we talked about this book, but whenever I would visit him, I'd go to his place called The Cave, where he kept his cars and everything. And we would talk a little bit about this book, and we'd go out to dinner or lunch, and we'd talk about it. But, you know, there were other things to talk about. And you know, Neil, I wasn't going to have him for much longer. And we just talked about it, and he said it. I mean, he said, we knew that I couldn't write this book until after he was gone. And so Neil died in January of 2020, and it really wrecked me. And that year, in the course of the year, I had lost my son and my dad, and then Neil. And so it was a really rough year, and I just kind of took all these notes, and I put them away. I couldn't look at them. I couldn't do anything, and I had other stuff to do, but I put Clockwork Destiny away. And in the year anniversary of Neil's death, I mean, there was a lot of stuff being posted, and I posted a bunch of things. And I really felt like this weight of responsibility that we had talked about this book. We were going to do this book, and how much more could I put it off? And I went back and I looked at all the notes, and there's some really great stuff there. And I'm seeing the book that we wanted to do. And I went to Neil's widow, Carrie, whom I know very well. And I said, look, we had this book we were working on, and we have all the notes, and we kind of had the picture of the book. And I feel like I should do it, but I won't do it unless I have your blessing. And she just said, of course I want you to do it, and it would be a great, great honor for Neil. So she gave me permission, and you know, then I was stuck. I had to write it. So a little bit after the year, I went back and reread all the notes and started putting it together. And I do all my writing with a handheld digital recorder. And I love going out to the Utah desert, the Canyonlands and the Red Rocks and the Arches. And my wife said, just go away for a week and do your writing, because I needed to do it. And I went out and I wrote half of the book in 1 week. I hiked all over the place, and I loved what I was writing, and it just kind of poured out of me. And I finished the rest of it when I came home, got it edited, sent it off to ECW Press, and I'm very, for those of you who are seeing the video, I'm very happy to show off Clockwork Destiny, which is the last book that Neil and I wrote, and it comes out on June 14th. So we're real close, and I just can't wait to see it. So that's half of your show, but I've talked all about the book that I wanted to.
Well, you've answered many questions I wanted to know, so thank you, Kevin. And what a beautiful story, and heartbreaking. And I mean, it's a bit of an artist the artist's journey too that you've gone through to get to this point. So
Well,
congratulations also.
and I also want to say that I had raised the bar so high with Clockwork Angels and Clockwork Lives that one of the other things I was putting off was, how do I write a book that's up to that quality? And so that's why it just kind of simmered on the back burner for years. But I mean, I'm too emotional about it, and I'm still too close to it. But I think it's a damn good book, and I think it stands up with the other two, and it may even be better. I'm not the one to say, but I'm very, very pleased with how it came out, and this is a very ecstatic time for me to have this book coming out, and I'll show it again. ECW did like this beautiful slip-cased version that's got a signed book plate in there, and there's a regular version too. But it's just it's a beautiful physical book, not just like a paperback that they knocked off you by in the airport, and that's the kind of story it is. And so anyway, I'm very pleased with that, but I've got so many other things that I'm working on, and it really is my dream job. I mean, I've been born to tell stories. Now, some people don't know what they want to do with their lives, and I just knew from the time I was a little kid that I wanted to tell stories, and I wanted to write things, and I make up science fiction universes and steampunk universes and fantasy universes and horror zombie universes and things. And all these characters are my imaginary friends, and I do terrible things to them, but it's still something that I enjoy doing. And, people say, like my mother-in-law, like, Kevin, you work so hard. Why don't you just relax and watch the football game? And I'm going, well, that would be hard work just to do that. I mean, the easy part is to make up stories.
Ever wondered what it takes to make it in the movie business? Peel back the curtain with 4-6 Success Filmmaking. 4-6 Success Filmmaking is where filmmakers share their stories and the secrets.
It's beyond competitive out there.
There have been movies that it's taken me 10 years to get made.
Don't wait to create. Like, you've got to just keep making stuff.
Tune in to 4-6 Success Filmmaking for your dose of cinematic realness, direct from the voices that have lived it.
Well, that's an amazing story in itself, and I love that. Yes, this book has become a tribute, right? That it's a beautiful object and an amazing sort of culmination for this journey that you and Neil have been on. I read Clockwork Angels. Yeah, I haven't read Clockwork Lives yet, or the third one, but I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, it's a very unique thing. I mean, we read a lot of science fiction books here. We talk about a lot of things, but I've never seen a book based on an album before, and it's quite it is you can read the lyrics right from the book, and then they're reflected in each chapter, and you have this like great little quote at the beginning of each chapter from the album that leads to the story, and it's absolutely unique. So yeah, our listeners, I hope, will appreciate it and run out and buy this book.
Well, and there's also a million like Rush Easter eggs throughout that I plant other lyrics here and there but the trick is to do it so that if you don't know them, you don't feel like you missed something. But if you do know them, you go, this guy really is a Rush fan. And not that they have it down. But.
And just to connect that with, I'm sure you know of Ready Player One. I'm not sure if you read it, but I appreciate those books. They're good. But I really liked the Rush references. So was that something that you and Neil reflected upon? Because that's a very popular book, and many Rush references in that book, because I believe the main character, more so in the book than the film, was a huge Rush fan.
And I wonder if I can get this. All right. Well, it's too small to look at, but how am I? Camera, other way. Anyway, by the door back there's a stack of books on that file cabinet. One of those books in there is a signed copy of Ready Player One that Ernie Klein, the author, sent to me to send to Neil. But Neil was sick and I couldn't send it to him. But so I yes, we're there. I don't know that Neil ever read it, but I read it, and in fact, I lost a lot of respect for Steven Spielberg, and I really was upset with the movie because they intentionally cut all the Rush out of it. And just a little trivia there, that when the trailer for Ready Player One came out, the first thing blasting is Tom Sawyer. It's Rush playing through all this stuff, because the Rush lyrics and the liner notes for 2112 and all this stuff, they're vital to the story. And then when the movie came out, there is not a whisper of Rush anywhere. They've cut it all out. And they used it in the trailer, like to trick the Rush fans to go in to watch it. And it's not there.
I felt the same way, Kevin. I felt the same way because I remember
upset.
being that.
I was upset. I just went, why would you cut all this stuff out? And well, there are more than, say, 10 or 12 Rush fans out there. Why would you not bring them into your movie? But that's a side thing, and you know, I was quite disappointed that they didn't follow that thread. I don't know. I know nothing personally whether Spielberg just doesn't like Rush or he felt it would be a bigger audience. I mean, the thread isn't there, so I only saw it once. It wasn't, to me, it wasn't something I needed to watch more than once. So
Low down, dirty Hollywood sleaze.
Yeah, but some Hollywood works fine. Like, look at, you know.
Oh yeah, wow, there you go.
Some Hollywood does great job.
Some Hollywood does great. So I have that graphic novel you just held up too. I should mention for readers who can't see, Kevin Anderson and Brian Herbert also have released a graphic novel of Dune. I think the first one is the first half of the first novel, right?
Well, and it's the first third. The novel itself is broken up into 3 parts, and so we did our point. I mean, people have been talking about doing a graphic novel of Dune for years, and we just couldn't find the right artist or the right way to do it. But when we got this with Abrams Books, which is a very high-end, like library, fancy art book, coffee table book publisher, we wanted to, how do you improve on Frank Herbert? So we decided that we were going to do the Dune graphic novel scene for scene exactly the way Frank wrote the novel. We weren't going to adapt it and put like musical numbers in it or whatever else we were going to do. We wanted to make this the graphic novel of the book. And the first volume came out last year. The second volume comes out in August, and we've already written and turned in the script for the third volume. And you know, you can imagine this if you just think about it, that, you know, I can write a script a whole lot faster than the artist can draw 9 panels in a page. And so it takes the artists a while to get all the beautiful pages done. But the first one came out, New York Times bestseller. It's named the best of the year lists in a whole bunch of categories, and we love the way it came out, and hope to continue with some other Frank Herbert novels in the series. But like I said, we've got several years in the pipeline to get all 3 volumes of this thing out. So
amazing. Well, I want to say for our listeners that this is a great gateway for young readers too. I gave that graphic novel to my 10-year-old son last year, and he blasted through it, and you know, gave him a taste. And I couldn't give him, you know, Dune the book. It's a little too early, but this is great. The kids can totally get into it, and by the time he went to see the new movie, you know, he was up to speed. He knew what was going on. He felt like he was already participating in the universe, and then he just loved it that much more.
Yeah.
So,
well, and another thing that we did, the first books that Brian and I wrote were a prequel trilogy with House Atreides, House Harkonnen, and House Carina, which is like the generation before Dune. It's young Duke Leto and his first battles with the Baron, and how the planetologist gets sent off to Dune, and Jessica is a young woman being trained by the Bene Gesserit, and how the love story of her and Duke Leto. Anyway, that's a trilogy, and we just did the first. It was in 12 issues of comics from Boom Studios, so there's a comic adaptation of House Atreides as well. And in fact, we just announced last week that we've also sold and will be doing 12 issues of House Harkonnen and House Carino. So, and that's the Dune graphic novel is a little bit more artistic and stylistic as a graphic novel, whereas the House Atreides stuff is more like a slam bang comic book like you would get every month, like a Marvel or a DC comic book. And so those are great. And I mean, that's every month I get a deadline to write a comic script. And
That's great.
so I'm enjoying that. And like you said, we've been writing the Dune novels for 25 years, I think now. And the comics is like it's like door number 2. There's a whole different way to bring people into the Dune universe. And like I said, we've been doing this for 25 years. Before Brian and I started working together, the sales of the original Dune books had kind of, not disappeared, but the sales had kind of dwindled a little bit. And all of Frank Herbert's other novels were out of print. So it was like everything had been kind of stuck on the back shelf. But then when we started doing the Dune books, then Frank's sales went through the roof. And now every one of his other science fiction books are back in print. And he wrote some amazing stuff, Hellstrom's Hive and Destination Void and The Eyes of Heisenberg. And we got all those back out. So
The Jesus Incident, and I just picked up a copy of The Godmakers the other day. I had no idea that he did so many other things.
Yeah, so it's everybody goes, oh, author of Dune. I go, yeah. And Dune is my favorite science fiction novel ever. But reading all of Frank Herbert's work really turned me on to, I guess you'd say, thought-provoking science fiction. Because when I read them, I was like a freshman in high school, and I was reading Edgar Rice Burroughs and Andre Norton and all kinds of science fiction adventure stuff. But, Frank Herbert doesn't have dinosaurs on Venus. Frank Herbert has like ecologically, philosophically based stories and some really intriguing things that made me it built me as a writer to come up with how Frank Herbert did all this stuff. And I just really enjoyed it all. I wish I had met him. I kind of missed him by that much. My first Resurrection Inc., my first novel that I told you about earlier, Frank Herbert was always my writing idol too. And I really admired and loved everything. When I sold my novel, Resurrection Inc., I was able to join the Science Fiction Writers of America because I now had a sold novel to a New York publisher, and I was a full member. I was a real member of the club, and I got their membership directory, which had Frank Herbert's home address in it. And I made up my mind that I was going to send my very first signed copy of my very first novel to Frank Herbert. But he died of pancreatic cancer before the book could be published. So I never got a chance to send it to him, but I've sure immersed myself in his notes and in his books. And Brian Herbert and I are like, it's amazing. We've written millions of words together, and we've had like 1 10-minute argument over 25 years. And he's still one of my very best friends. And we just hope to, now it's really opening up with the Dune movie and now comics and games and just all kinds of other things to do. So
how did you meet Brian? I've been wanting to ask you this all.
As I said, Frank, I loved Frank's work. And for anybody who has read the original Dune novels, Frank wrote 6 of them. And number 6 is called Chapter House Dune. And Frank wrote that book, and it's building this story. And at the end of it, it's just a giant cliffhanger. It's a Luke, I am your father kind of cliffhanger. And then Frank Herbert passed away. So the story just stops. And for 10 years, as a fanboy, I kept thinking, how does this story end and where does it go? And I knew that Brian Herbert was a well-established science fiction writer. In fact, he had published a whole bunch of books. And the very last book that Frank Herbert wrote was a collaboration with Brian called Man of Two Worlds. And so I kind of kept waiting for Brian to write the next Dune book so I could see how it ended. And I finally got a hold of Brian's address, and I sent him just a letter, and I kind of described my love for Dune and my admiration for all of Frank's work, and I gave him my credits, which I'd not just written in Star Wars and X-Files, so I could kind of demonstrate that I could write in somebody else's universe. But I also had like the Nebula Award nomination, a Bram Stoker Award nomination, and all kinds of critical acclaim for other things. So I asked him if he was going to finish the Dune story, or if he wasn't planning to, could we maybe work together on it? And he called me up, and we just talked for, he called me up out of the blue. I had never spoken to him before. And we just started talking, and my wife said that after about a minute, you guys started speaking a different language, because we were finishing each other's sentences and riffing off of all like obscure God Makers references and things like that. So we really hit it off and decided we might want to work together. So we brainstormed, and the rest is history. And we're still making history because we're still writing this stuff. So
Yeah, you did mention history, and so the rest is history. And so I do want to give a little overview of just the magnitude of this, because I think it's really fascinating that you and Brian have written the canon, right? All the canon since for the Duneverse, which is now exploding, becoming into the popular consciousness. And so I just want to sort of tell people how much you guys have done. So you mentioned already that you wrote House Atreides, House Harkonnen, and House Carino. Carino, by the way, for those who don't know, is the house of the
Imperial
Emperor.
House.
Yeah, the Imperial House, the Padishah Emperor. So that was back in 99, 2000, and 2001. But then you wrote another trilogy, which for me is the most fascinating. It's called Legends of Dune. And this goes way back, so 10,000 years before the events of Dune. 3 books called The Butlerian Jihad, The Machine Crusade, and The Battle of Corrin. And this is, I think, the really interesting part of the Duneverse that's sort of unique among many sci-fi franchises, right? Where this sort of explains, this was the war against AI, against machine intelligence, and this sort of created this world where you have mentats instead of robots and AI. And I think that's really key to the medieval flavor, right? Sort of of the whole Dune universe. So that's fascinating. But then you went on again. So I guess there was a tetralogy planned that turned into 2 books. So Paul of Dune and Winds of Dune. That was called Heroes of Dune.
Well, those were kind of books. Paul of Dune is like the book that connects Dune and Dune Messiah. There are like 15 years there where at the end of Dune, Paul's this hero and he's just overthrown the evil emperor and he's going to marry the princess and hooray, live happily ever after. And then the next book comes out as 15 years later, and Paul's a real bastard. He's a tyrant. He's got billions of deaths on his hands, and he's kind of turned into a emo woe is me kind of guy. And like, how does a hero become a tyrant? And that's a really interesting story. And Winds of Dune is at the end. It's after Dune Messiah, and at the end of Dune Messiah, I should say spoilers, but for Pete's sake, you should have read these books a long time ago. They're Frank Herbert's originals. And at the end of Dune Messiah, Paul, who's the emperor, he's running the whole empire, and he's blind, and Chani dies, and he just walks off into the desert and leaves the whole empire to itself. Mm-hmm. Well, what happens after that? Mm-hmm. I mean, you don't just walk away from an empire. And so Winds of Dune, it starts out with Lady Jessica and Caladan getting word that her son has walked off into the desert and disappeared. And, oh, by the way, nobody's in the driver's seat running the empire. So she goes running in, and that's the story of how her and how she and Alia and the Duncan Idaho Gola and everybody like try to hold the empire together. It wasn't the other 2 books. It wasn't really a tetralogy. There were just going to be different books in between different things, and we may still write them, but it's not like a trilogy with a beginning, middle, and end where you have to get to it. And we kind of wanted to do a Princess Irulan book. This kind of the story of her, and that was going to be Irulan of Dune or the Throne of Dune or something like that. And then at the end of Children of Dune, Leto II has taken on the sandtrout skin, and he's going to transform into a half man, half sandworm over the course of many centuries. And he's going to live a long time to be the God Emperor of Dune and reshape human society. And so that's where Children of Dune ends, when he's like this young kid who's now got a superpower suit and things. And then God Emperor of Dune takes place 1,500 years later, something like that. And it's all different. And we thought, well, maybe we should do a book after Children of Dune to show how Leto kind of becomes the God Emperor. And I still think that would be a great book, but you have to brace yourself, because in this book, Leto II watches every character that we know from Dune die. Just because 1,500 years have passed. I mean, even if they die in their sleep in old age, Jessica's going to die, Gurney's going to die, Ali is going to die, Duncan's going to die. I mean, everybody's going to die. And we thought, what a cheery book that's going to turn out to be. So that just didn't stay at the top of the list, because after the Butlerian Jihad trilogy, like you said, the 10,000 years ago, the rise of the thinking machines, and I mean the fight against the thinking machines, and that trilogy ends with the machines being defeated. The humans are going to set up their own empire, and of course they've learned all their lessons, and they'll never make other mistakes again. Yeah, right.
Right.
But we thought, well, then what happened in like the century after that? How did the Bene Gesserit school get formed? How did the Mentats get formed? How did the Navigators and the Spacing Guild get formed? And so we went back and did that trilogy.
Yeah. It's
called The Schools of Dune, Sister of Dune, Mentats of Dune, and Navigators of Dune. Yeah. And that's kind of a quieter trilogy, but it's got some of our best stuff in there. I think it's got probably our best villain. Well, one of our best villains in everything that we've written in Manfred Tyrande, who's just this absolute determined fanatic against computers, technology, AI, and he's just on a crusade to just stomp out anybody who's even got like a video game or something. He's just trying to wipe everything out. And this guy is so fanatical, but he's so single-minded in purpose, and he's just a scary guy. So anyway, I thought that trilogy was great. And then as some of you might have noticed, there was a movie that came out last year. And Indeed. So as the movie was being filmed, we felt that the most logical thing that we should be doing now would be to tell another story that's kind of set before Dune begins. So we did a trilogy that starts with the Duke of Caladan, the Lady of Caladan, and then the third book called The Heir of Caladan will come out this October. And that's sort of all this intrigues that take place in the year before Dune. And if you look at Dune, so you've got House Atreides. It's not a terribly powerful house. They've got one planet, Caladan. Duke Leto is really liked in the Landsraad, but he's not like the biggest contender. So how did the Harkonnens get yanked off of spice production on the planet Arrakis? And why would you give it to this kind of out of the way House Atreides? How did they get it? And this is Paul Atreides when he's 14, and Leto and Jessica have a big crisis that they have to go through. So we're working on that trilogy. We felt that, big spoiler alert, but the last book in the trilogy is going to basically end right before Dune starts. So it's right. It all really ties together. So like I said, we may go back to do those other two interquel books that we were talking about, but we've got so many popcorn kernels popping right now all over the place that I really couldn't tell you what the next thing we have going, because we have so many other things. Did I mention I just signed up to write 24 more comic scripts on the House Atreides? House Harkonnen and House Carino, and we are enjoying being very busy, and we are really enjoying that the Dune universe has become really popular worldwide, and Frank Herbert is finally getting the attention again that we think he deserves.
Absolutely. No, I think it's amazing, and there's so much material, right? I hope this film franchise just takes off and keeps going. I hate to sort of say it like Star Wars, but there's so much material, right? And you and Brian have added so much. And I would be remiss if we didn't conclude this very detailed discussion of all the prequels of Dune without telling everyone that you have also written sequels, right? There are 2 sequels, I believe, right?
See, when you were leading through all of that, I kind of forgot what I told you the whole reason was, that I wanted to know how the story ended.
Right,
So,
yeah, exactly.
And so Brian and I did, there's one more piece that I didn't tell you about, that when I went up to brainstorm with Brian about the House trilogy, the House Atreides trilogy, that it was just this timing that we're up and brainstorming and coming up with all the backstories of characters, and then this is the first time that we met, and we spent a whole weekend kind of like nonstop brainstorming. So I went home and I just sort of slept because my brain was wrung dry. But right at that time too, the estate attorney called up Brian and said, well, it's been, I think, 10 years since Frank Herbert's death, and they were like closing the files and packing up the boxes and putting all the records and stuff in storage. And they asked Brian, so what do you want us to do with these safe deposit box keys that we found? And Brian's like, what safe deposit box keys? And they had to go to this bank in downtown Seattle, and they actually had to drill out the lock because it was so old that the keys were corroded or something. And inside the safe deposit box, there were like some jewelry and some photographs and recipes and some letters and a dot matrix printout of the outline for Dune 7 that Frank Herbert had written about how he wanted the story to end.
Amazing. You heard it here first.
Wow.
Yeah, that is like, oh, well, here's kind of our roadmap. We still have a whole lot of details to fill in, but now we kind of knew where the whole structure of the story was. And then as a second thing, so after we did our outline and worked on the whole trilogy for the House trilogy, I guess it's called the Prelude to Dune trilogy. And we sent that out, and a whole bunch of publishers bid on it, and it sold to Bantam Books for, it was, I think, the largest single science fiction contract in publishing history. And so this was a really big deal. And Brian at the time wasn't even a full-time writer. He was running an insurance office and doing that. But obviously now that we've got these 3 big books to write, that Brian was going to become a full-time writer. And he came out to visit me, and you're here in the video, for those of you, I'm sitting in my writing office. I have kind of a dedicated writing office in my house. And so Brian wisely thought that he needed a writing office in his house if he was going to be writing all these books with me. I mean, at the time, I don't think we ever guessed we would end up writing. I think we're at 19 novels now that we've done together. But so they have in their house, they have a 3-car garage. And for those of you who have 3-car garages, you know that you park cars in 2 of them and pile junk in the 3rd one. And they thought that the 3rd garage might be a nice candidate just to remodel to make into a writing office. So they cleared everything out of it, the lawnmowers and the baby clothes and the cans of coffee cans with nails in them and everything. And as they cleared everything out, they found up in the rafters a Xerox paper box that had Frank Herbert's handwriting on the side of it that said Dune Notes. And inside that were like 3,000 pages of notes and chapters Frank had written that he cut out of the books, and pages and pages of those epigraphs that he would put at the top of his chapters, and character backgrounds. This was really cool, and we have no idea what. I'm guessing, and Brian doesn't know, so he's not going to say it, but I'm guessing that Frank wrote some backstory of the characters for the David Lynch movie so that the actors could see, oh, here's what the background of my character is. But we had like these little mini biographies of all these characters, which were like great for us to be doing the prequel stories. And oh, okay, so this is Reverend Mother Mohiam's story. Well, then we'll put that into the prequels, and we worked on that. One of the other books that we didn't mention that we put together was called The Road to Dune, which concludes a whole bunch of these notes and the chapters that were cut out and things. And so we. It's kind of like a Silmarillion. So we've been doing a lot of stuff in this universe. And when I said 19 books, Brian and I also wrote a 3-book trilogy. Well, that's kind of redundant, but it was a trilogy, big fat space opera, much like Dune, called Hellhole. Hellhole Awakening, and Hellhole Inferno, and that was our own big epic, like Dune, only it's our own creation. So we love working together, and we keep doing it.
That's amazing. And so, just to complete that, it was Hunters of Dune and Sandworms.
Yeah.
Sandworms of
So
Dune
yeah,
that
it
were the
was.
sequels?
Yeah, Frank had left this outline, but if you've read Frank's later Dune books, like Heretics of Dune and Chapter House Dune, Frank liked to leave everything, a lot of things off screen. That he had the honored matres pretty much destroy the planet Dune, and he does it in between chapters. He doesn't even show it happening, and I'm much more of a a film and visual and Star Wars generation. And I thought, well, wait a second, if they're going to come and destroy the planet Dune and turn it into a charred ball, I want to see that. I want to show it. So we, I guess the point I'm getting to is that Frank's outline, when we wanted to put all of the scenes in and all the action and everything, that we realized that it really needed the space to do two books. And so we did Hunters of Dune and Sandworms of Dune, which wraps it up. And then we went back and we've done some more prequel stuff, because there's like 15,000 years of history that we've got here. So if we want to, there's a lot of things, but you also want to make sure that every book that we do really tells a big story and a big complicated thing. And now I'm going to totally contradict myself, because the next book that we have coming out, which comes out on June 28th, so it's real close now, is called Sands of Dune, which is just sort of a collection of novellas and shorter pieces, because not everything in the Dune universe needs to be 700 pages long. We could do like following this character. And one of the original pieces in there is this really cool novella of young Shadout Mapes when she was a young Fremen firebrand, and she was like a freedom fighter guerrilla that she would go and try to oust the Harkonnens. And this is right after the House Rashesi had been ousted from Arrakis, and so it's her days as a. I mean, in Dune it says that you've born children and lost them, and you've had scars in your life and all this stuff you've done in your younger years. Well, we did a little Shadout Mapes story, and we've got a Sardaukar story in there, and there's another in the novel Dune after the Battle of Arrakeen, when House Atreides falls and the Harkonnens come in. Gurney Halleck goes off into the desert, and he's with the smugglers for 2 years before we ever see him again. Well, we got a story that kind of tells what happened during those 2 years, and so there are things that are really key elements to the Dune universe, but they're not trilogy length. So Sands of Dune is kind of a neat in between the course of the big books. You can have something fun to read.
Well, I love that you mentioned the Shadout Mapes, because that's my favorite all-time name of any character in all of science fiction, and we have our own tiny bit of apocrypha to tell our listeners that when we were trying to figure out a name for our podcast, I suggested the Shadout Tapes, because I thought that was hilarious, and only like the biggest sci-fi geeks in the world would ever know what we're talking about. But it didn't stick.
Yeah.
Well, we've got to jump over to some other franchises just a little bit here.
Yeah, I did
so much on Dune. I mean, you've done a few others, but I mean, what we just got from you, Kevin, out of the Dune stories and Frank Herbert stories, that's just amazing. Is congratulations and wow, what a journey you've been on. I love that. So a little bit of a 180 here, though, but one of my favorite franchises of all time, and there's not too many books, but the Planet of the Apes. And can you tell us how you got involved with this one? Is this something that you seek out? Is this someone seeks you out for? How does that happen?
So what you're holding up is a Planet of the Apes anthology. That the old Planet of the Apes movies, the Charlton Heston and the Beneath the Planet of the Apes, and that whole sequence. I love Roddy McDowall, and then the Tim Burton reboot, and then the recent versions, which are kind of a more gritty, future historical when the apes had taken over. I found that interesting, but that was something that somebody wrote me, the editor on that, who knew me, and just said, "Well, Kevin, we've got this Planet of the Apes anthology, and and we'd love you to do a story. And of course I said, yeah, I'd love Planet of the Apes. Let me do a story. And not, of course, realizing, if you just rewatch the movies, that's about 15 hours of time you have to spend. And then, that's a lot of research to get into for this. And some of it, I'm sorry to say, when you rewatch the old movies, they aren't as good as you remember they were. And like the first one, it seems like they spend half an hour just wandering around the desert looking for something, and then they finally bump into Ape City. But anyway, it was a great movie when I was younger, and I enjoyed it. And I worked with a good friend of mine, Sam Knight, who's also a Planet of the Apes fan, and we just wanted to take Dr. Zaius out to the Forbidden Zone and have him play with that. So that one goes, and I worked in X-Files and Star Wars, but my stuff in Star Wars is now called Legends because it's a different continuity now. So,
well, that's a question I had for you involving Planet of the Apes and kind of the Star Wars too. Is when I was a teenager in the 90s, the Star Wars books that was continuity. Like knowing that Luke Skywalker had children and Han and Leia had children, that was a part of the ongoing story that was official Star Wars. And then the films kind of did their own thing with Disney recently, and even with the prequels, the books still kind of made sense because there weren't prequel books, or not many. And then with Planet of the Apes, those films contradict themselves in the first 3 films right away, and then there was a TV show in the 70s too. They all contradict each other.
Them. And there was a cartoon show too, an animated.
And it makes no sense. There's cars in the just like in the original novel. There were technology, and that was the cartoon took that on, but the TV show didn't. Neither did the movies. So when it comes to continuity, would you rather kind of have the lines to draw within and to stay in those lines, or do you like when there's less continuity in a franchise for you to be able to go anywhere? How does that play out with your writing?
Well, when I first started doing the Star Wars books, Timothy Zahn was doing his trilogy, and I was the very next trilogy. So when we were doing them, we were like the first explorers going out of this whole huge universe. That there was the original 3 movies and a couple of little things. I mean, there were some kind of goofy Ewok movies and droids cartoons and things, but nothing really to worry about. And we had the whole galaxy far, far away to explore and do all kinds of things. And this was before George was even, I can't speak for what his mindset, but before he claimed to even be interested in doing the prequel movies, that these were all that were going to be, just these books. And the thing is that the books turned out to be so successful and the fans were so popular, I think it let everybody know, oh, this isn't like Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. This is a living franchise, and people loved them. So then they had lots of other books, and I wrote a whole bunch of them. I think my total of books and comics for Lucasfilm was 54 that I did. And so we built this whole thing, and the prequel movies were still very much in line with the books, that they were careful. There was this whole continuity department that made sure everything was all fit in line. And early on, I mean, I went up to Skywalker Ranch a lot, like probably every month. And I met with the Lucasfilm, the head of licensing, and we spent a lot of time just kind of brainstorming, where should the book line go and where should the other stuff go? And it was it might even have been when I started just my Jedi Academy trilogy, because Timothy Zahn already had his books that he was doing. But at the time there was a Dark Horse comic series called Dark Empire, which was also a sequel to Star Wars. And they, in the time frame, I think Tim's trilogy takes place like 3 years after Return of the Jedi, and the Dark Empire comic series is like 4 years after Return of the Jedi. But they have nothing to do with each other. They're like two totally independent stories. And so then I'm coming in to write my Jedi Academy trilogy, and I'm like, well, which one do I follow, and how do they both work? And I didn't even know about the Dark Horse comics until somebody told me about them. So I read them, and I went, wow. And I asked the Lucasfilm person, I said, so do I take into account the Dark Empire stuff when I'm writing my Jedi Academy trilogy? And they hadn't really thought about it, and they just said, well, just don't refer to the events in Dark Empire. And I stopped, and I'm going, well, but in Dark Empire, the Emperor comes back as a clone, Luke goes over to the dark side, and Leia has another baby. It's not like, well, let's just not mention any of that stuff. So I really worked on like putting the two of them together in my trilogy. And then I remember I had a meeting with the Lucasfilm people, and we really discussed, because at the time, the big book franchise was Star Trek. Like, there was a new Star Trek book out every month. There was a different, like, adventure of Captain Kirk or Captain Picard or whatever. And Star Trek chose at the time that none of their books would connect to any other book. Every single Star Trek book was like a standalone episode, and you could just pick up any Star Trek book and read it, and not have to read 15 other books to get where you were. And so we talked about, well, do we want our Star Wars books to be each one's just a random adventure, or do we want them all to fit on a specific timeline and have that whole future history tie together? And they chose the latter, which is a lot more work, but that's what they wanted to do. And so everybody kind of tied their stuff together and worked really hard. And it does. I mean, I don't know how well it lasted when it got to be 150 books or whatever, because I got my other projects to work on. I can't read that many books. But you know, when they announced the Force Awakens and J.J. Abrams was going to do it, there was quite an uproar among fandom that, as you were mentioning, Tristan, quite an uproar among the fandom when it was announced that, well, you know, JJ wasn't going to follow that storyline. He was going to make up his own. Now, part of me can really understand that. If you're JJ Abrams being brought in, do you really want somebody to say, oh, by the way, read these 300 books and don't contradict anything in them before you start? That's a bit of a challenge. And, you know, as you mentioned with the Planet of the Apes movies, but just think about how many times even Star Trek has been rebooted, or how many times has Batman been rebooted? The new The Batman that came out, does that really make you not want to watch the Christian Bale Batmans or the Michael Keaton Batman, or anything else? They're just, I write a lot of comics. It's kind of like, well, there's Earth 2 and Earth 1 and Earth Prime, and so our books that we all wrote all along is one Star Wars universe. It's Earth Prime, if you want to call it that. And then the movies are their own thing. George always said that the movies were what he wanted to do, and that the books were, a secondary continuity. I'm just very happy that they're still around and people love them. And, you know, I kind of wish that they had just kept that storyline going, but I don't quite know where the books are right now. Are they only, well, there's so many different TV series. We just watched episode 3 of Obi-Wan last night. And there's the Andor that's coming, and Tales of the Jedi was just announced, which doesn't have anything to do with my comics, apparently. There's just all kinds of things that they're doing. And, you know, it gets to the point where you sort of have to put on beer goggles a little bit, because if you've got that many Star Wars stories going, you're going to be paralyzed if you can't bend a few of the things that have happened in somebody else's book. I mean, I'm watching Star Trek Strange New Worlds, which is the Captain Pike series, the prequel series. and they're kind of tying it in with the Discovery series, but it doesn't really tie in as perfectly with classic Trek, which is what it's supposed to be a prequel to. I'm enjoying it, but excuse me, that's not Nurse Chapel, and excuse me, that's not number one. But both of whom were played by Majel Barrett, by the way. But that doesn't mean I can't enjoy it. I'm a fanboy. You sort of tune it out, and watch it for what it is. And yeah, I can be the fanboy and complain because wait a minute, that contradicts episode 793 in minute 22 of. But
it's also a matter of time before you hear about the TV show that comes out that's based on one of the books, and I've heard rumors of the Dark Horse series maybe being adapted. So there's going to be other series that happen that adapt certain storylines, and we're all able, just like you mentioned, Kevin, with the different Batman, we're able to step back, go, okay, this universe, and we can step back and go this one next, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Right. I mean, the stuff that I wrote is obviously the best of all of them. That's something I guess you also need to make clear, that when I wrote the Jedi Academy books or the Tales of the Jedi comics or the Young Jedi Knights series and stuff, I loved it. I got to play with the best toys in the universe, but they're not my toys. I have to put them back in the toy box when I'm done. They're owned by Lucasfilm, and now they're owned by Disney. And I'm like a surrogate mother. I have a bouncing baby that I really love, but it goes to somebody else. And that's the understanding from the beginning. And I'm just very, very happy that I got to work in the Star Wars universe and do so much in it. And I see little stuff from my books or my comics in the new Star Wars things, in the new movies, and I don't get mad that they stole my stuff. I get like this thrill like you wouldn't believe, like, ooh, I've actually made my mark in Star Wars because there's one of the Bomar monks, or there, the double lightsaber was in our Tales of the Jedi comics before it ever showed up on screen.
Amazing.
And little things in the Kessel Run in the Solo movie. Well, that was all described. How that all worked was in my Jedi Search. So,
well, maybe you're going to be the next Stan Lee. You'll have a whole lot of like little appearances in all these in the new movies. Didn't get paid for it, but you got famous. Yeah,
I'll get in the next Dune movie going, hey, give me some water.
For our listeners, Kevin, where can they find you and your books and more information on what you're doing next, and how can they connect with you?
Best way is to just find me, Kevin J. Anderson, on Facebook. Just look for that, and I update that all the time. I'm on Twitter as the word "the" and my initials, the KJA. I have a website, wordfire.com, but honestly, I'm too busy to update that all that often. But I do kind of want to plug we have because when the pandemic happened, I used to do 3 Comic Cons a month or 3 science fiction conventions or something. I was all over the place, and I was meeting people, and I was signing books, and that all shut down for 2 years pretty much. And so we had to set up a way for the fans to get their signed books and everything else. So it's called wordfireshop.com, Wordfire Shop, and that's where you can get. I've got this the numbered, limited, slip-cased Clockwork Destiny. I've got there's also a big, fancy deluxe edition of the Dune graphic novel, and I've got signed copies of almost every one of the books that I'm talking about here, and you can sign up for our newsletter there, and just all. I like to keep in touch with people because I love what I'm doing, and I'm all. I go out on a hike and I'm dictating a short story for an anthology, and I'll send pictures of my hike, and I'll talk about what story I was doing, and just things like that. And I just I love what I'm doing, and I kind of love to share it and kind of make the fans feel like they're riding along in the back seat watching me or something. So wordfireshop.com, you can get signed copies of everything, and place to check out.
Fantastic. So look in the description and the show notes. We'll have that link in there, or many links in there to get you over to Kevin.
There's a lot of stuff to talk about, and as you can tell, I kind of like talking about it. But I love my stories, and I love sharing them with people, and I love hearing back from people who, read my stuff and they either enjoyed it or it made them think about something, or whatever. So that's what a writer does.
Well, Kevin, maybe we'll connect with you again, because if you like talking about the books, we love hearing it, and so do our listeners. So we'll connect with you again down the road and hear about what's new, and maybe we'll be able to talk about the Dune movies one day with you.
Yeah, well, and I might have other books coming out that we could talk about in the future sometime. So
yes,
most likely. Yeah.
Get in touch with me later on. We'll figure it out. Okay,
Sounds great.
Thanks,
Okay,
guys. Good
thank you
night.
so much, Kevin.
Bye.
Thank you so much, Kevin. That was fantastic. I really feel like we got some behind the scenes and really cool info on Frank Herbert himself and the Dune universe. That was awesome. In 2 weeks from now, we've got the Last Watch episode, and then 2 weeks after that, a conversation with Charlie Strauss. Rate and review us wherever you listen to podcasts. We really appreciate it. All right, thanks everyone. Have a great summer. Until next time.